Until we get out of the cocoon of personal prosperity and think collective, we as God's people will go nowhere on this earth. I like what Mordecai said to Esther. What if God raised you to be a queen for such a time as this? Let me ask you, if Esther was only concerned about her place in the throne, would her people have been saved? If Joseph was only concerned about his place in the palace, would his father's generation exist today? Think about that. If we want to see Yahweh's culture reign supreme, then Yahweh's people must yield to the reason for their creation. Hi, Merry Christmas, and welcome to Rediscovered in Christ. As always, it is my pleasure to have you join me. Thank you so much. In the last episode, we talked about why Christians, Yahweh's children, should have a mindset of collective prosperity over personal prosperity. In this episode, I will further convince you why collective prosperity. So let me jump into it. Why is collective prosperity so important? I will tell you, but first, let me tell you my usual stories. I hope you are not tired of them. And by the way, they are real stories. There was a certain time in an African country, and I believe it still happens till this day, where young graduates, the brightest amongst them, were approached by a group of people and given an offer. And the offer was to join a certain cult group and be given a vehicle, a 2007 model vehicle, and a job. Most graduates fell over each other to take this opportunity because if you're familiar with that African country, and again, it doesn't only happen there, many graduates are churned out every year and there are no jobs for them. So it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for some of those graduates to take that offer. There was also this international company that was complicit. In fact, before you could be employed in that company, you had to be recommended by someone who was already a member of the cult group that works in that company. And of course, they wouldn't recommend you if you were not willing to join the cult group that reigns supreme in that company. It didn't stop there. The story still gets interesting. In fact, there was also a time when Christians were given a choice. Denounce Christ, change your name, and accept the name of a certain religion if you wanted to stand the chance to be considered for jobs in the public service. Some were not only forced to deny Christ, they were also forced to take up the daughters of wealthy men who have devoted their lives in the service of anything other than Christ in order for the people, for those Christians to stand a chance of getting a job in the public service. That's not all. Some Christians were forced to accept ideologies that were totally against their faith and their belief in order to gain aids and grants to run their companies. Let me stop here and let us reflect a bit. Do I blame these people that I talked about in the story for taking the actions that they did? Well, I blame them 60%. What about the other 40%? Who do you blame? You may ask me. Well, I will tell you, but let me ask you some questions first. Are there none of God's children in the public service to ensure that recruitment into the service is based on merit and no other factor other than that? Are there no companies or corporations that are owned by God's children and are large enough to absorb the number of job seekers based on merit? Are there no large businesses that are run by God's children who give a percentage of their profit as grants or aids or even loans to God's children looking to start up their businesses? You ask me, what about the 40%, right? Let me tell you, until we get out of the cocoon of personal prosperity and think collective, we as God's people will go nowhere on this earth. Until we have more of God's people enter into the public service and find their voices in it, then evil will continue to reign supreme there. Until God's children who are called to own big businesses and corporations get to it, There will continue to be compromises in order to get grants and aids. I tell you, God has created people to solve these problems outlined in the story, but they are still wrapped up in personal prosperity. They are still looking for what is in it for them and not what is in it for the collective. I like what Mordecai said to Esther. Don't think you will be spared when your people are killed. You need to speak up for us. But if we decide not to speak up for us, we know God won't keep us stranded. He will raise someone else. But think about it, Mordecai said to Esther. What if God raised you to be a queen for such a time as this? I like what Joseph said to his brothers. He said, it was God who sent me here, not you. And he sent me here to keep you and your families from starving and to ensure that they are survivors. Let me ask you, if Esther was only concerned about her place in the throne, would her people have been saved? If Joseph was only concerned about his place in the palace, would his father's generation exist today? Think about that. Let me close this way. You might think to yourself, because you've heard people say, I'm but just an individual, what can I really do? You have never been farther away from the truth. I say that because people drive culture, and culture changes systems. If we want to see Yahweh's culture reign supreme, then Yahweh's people must yield to the reason for their creation. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with me. See you next time. God bless you. Bye-bye.